So let me tell you what's been on my mind, guys. And we're gonna begin with these widespread comparisons you're seeing and you're witnessing between Ukraine, the Ukraine-Russia situation, and Lord of the Rings. And you never see the images going around of like Ukraine as this grassy field of golden wheat, and then a blue sky, beautiful blue sky, and then Russia's Mordor and their orcs, all that racist shit, and it's just old Soviet machinery and rust and metal, and it's just kind of this classical distinction, romantic distinction between peaceful and tranquil pre-modern life and industrial modernity, right? And that's what Lord of the Rings was really about, right? You really get this kind of depiction of like the tranquility and harmony of life before the Industrial Revolution, and then the Industrial Revolution happens and it's destroying nature, and it's just it's that kind of thing. The Ukrainians are these cheerful hobbits, and then the Russians are orcs. That whole kind of thing that we're witnessing. Potatoes. Yeah. So, we have that from Tolkien. And it really got me thinking, because it's kind of a paradox. The reason it's a paradox is because all of the globalist forces that are amassing around Ukraine, the rallying cry of Ukraine, represent everything but traditional modernity. They represent like the most kind of supposedly advanced, force of just kind of progress, and then Russia represents this kind of older traditional society, and it really reminds me of what Dugin said about this issue, where he pretty much put it this way. He said that post-modernity differs from modernity in the sense that it's based on simulation, right? It's based on simulating the traditional. So, for example, the best example of that would be Avatar, right? Avatar is a movie that used like the most technologically advanced CGI to represent like the most raw depiction of natural authenticity. And you just have this really big contradiction. On the one hand, artificial technology and CGI to make it appear. On the other hand, you have raw natural authenticity. So for Dugin, in post-modernity, it's about deception. It's the way in which we are getting this kind of fake simulation of modern life. Of traditional life. And you have a really interesting example of that in Ukraine. You have a really interesting example of that with Ukraine as like this kind of the golden pasture of the, traditional farm life, and it's all peaceful and harmonious. It's a beautiful solar punk, Reddit fantasy, whatever the fuck. It's and this got me thinking about a lot of things. I was reading today about life during Ottoman times, during the Ottoman Empire, and then how that changed with modernity, and then the French colonial occupation and stuff, right? In a sense, it's really weird how I'm here, right? Me, Haz, I'm here. It's weird that I'm here in this country doing this, right? I mean, a few generations ago, where my family comes from, we were just farmers, you would expect, or merchants or something, riding horses or donkeys, trading or farming. And life really was the same for, I would argue, for thousands of years. It was pretty much unchanging. I mean, you did have these gradual changes, right, in history from, for example, Lebanon, right, which is where my family comes from. You did have these very sudden, very violent, gradual changes. But after, they were very quick and sudden, and then life went on in a normal, natural way. And it's almost like there was this kind of sense of a harmony of life. Like, people lived pretty much the same way with the same traditions and customs for undisturbed for so fucking long. Almost nothing ever changed, right? You more or less had the same way of life that was preserved for generations and generations and generations. And sure, you would have these shocks that would change everything, right? I mean, throughout the Hellenistics and the Persians and the Romans and then Islam, and then these were just kind of these sudden things that represented, and then the Mongols, I guess, and the Mamluks and the Ottomans. But when you have these sudden shocks that really just interrupt time, they're very, very sudden, right? They're extremely sudden, quick. They don't last very long. And then life returns to how it was before. And I'm just using Lebanon as an example, but that's true for all human history in general. All human history, right? We were living this kind of life based on tradition, right? And the reason it's based on tradition is just it's almost natural. You're living this kind of natural life, right? It's kind of weird, that's why I'm saying it's weird how I'm here, right? Because it's so sudden. I see it in my family, I see it in my relatives, I see it in my community, my people, it's just such a sudden shock, right? And it's not really something we've gotten over, I don't think, as a people. I haven't. It's affected all of us in different ways, I think. Just modernity, right? Let me explain and elaborate more on that, okay? I want to talk more about this because Heidegger kind of talked about this, and I really want you guys to pay attention here, right? Don't have a sense of urgency. I woke up today and I looked around in my apartment, and the first thing I realized, there is so much shit in here. Not only is there so much shit in here, this whole apartment is shit. And everything around me is kind of shit. It's like a prison. Why? What do I mean by that? Let me elaborate what I mean by that. In pre-modern times, in traditional life, you have things. You have pots and pans and stuff you use to cook, and I guess you have clothing, and you have things. You do have things. But these are all things that are crafted in a very, eloquent, I guess, meaningful way. They're all crafted, right? And the craft is based on an art, and the art is passed down from generations to generations. And the way in which things are exchanged are based on these customs and traditions, right? Everything, it seems like the whole world is animated with a sense of meaning, and it all flows harmoniously in this kind of river of time, right? Life has a sense of harmony, okay? Something's really disturbing about all of this, right? Something, when I look around my apartment or go anywhere, really, right? Something's really wrong. Just in the sense that everything around us, right? All of these things are kind of crystallized with abstraction, Like this water bottle. This water bottle is like it imposes on us this sense of anxiety, this really neurotic sense of anxiety. When I look in my apartment, or you look around anywhere, you look in your apartment or your house, right? There's just gonna be a lot of shit. And the meaning of these things are not very clear. It's not very clear what this means. Oh, it has a utility, a practical utility, sure. But toward what ends, right? In a traditional society, things don't just have a utility to be consumed and just used. They represent the very ends of life. You know, your pots, your jar. Let's say you're a woman working in a house, right? Working is even a loaded term, right? But let's say you're a woman attending to her home, right? Your pots and pans and your clay jars or whatever the fuck you're using. Those things are not a means to an end. Those are the end. Those are the ends. They represent the ends of your life. It's your way of life. It's all part of your way of life. You understand? Whereas, all around... So, guys, let me just put it this way. Look in my apartment. Does anything here bear the semblance of eternity? Nothing here can last. I'm not just talking about planned obsolescence where the goods will eventually break. I mean, it's like, this is not meant to last a long time. Right? All of these things we have in our life are meant to be used and discarded very quickly. So the feeling I get from this when I wake up today, right, is just this kind of sense that there's just this avalanche of things falling on me, right? Just an avalanche of just stuff, shit, basically falling on me, and it's like, where do I actually settle? Where do I actually settle and start to live, you know? I think all of us human beings have this feeling one way or another. Modernity is not a river of time. It's an abrupt cut of the river of time. When we have these goods surrounding us, what do we have, right? What we have is, we have a freeze. We have an arrest of time. Everything stops suddenly. This river of time, this natural flow of time where we just live our lives in this kind of, I guess, more organic way, right? Stops and comes to an end. The Greek myth of Sisyphus. Have you ever heard of the Greek myth of Sisyphus? Where some guy, I don't know who it was, Sisyphus, he has to push the boulder uphill for all eternity, forever. This is modern life. Let me put it this way, in pre-modern life, we are going down the hill. We are the boulder that's tumbling down the hill. It's natural, right? It's based on something beyond us. But modern life is us pushing the boulder up the hill. And the question is, to what end? That's the question. To what end? We are pushing the ball. It's just not fishing. You know, that's what I really wanted to talk about and get to, right? Because this is going places. What I'm about to tell you, it's gonna, trust me, this is gonna become more than what it sounds like. You're wrong. You're wrong. This idea that everything has been the same is not true. Something did happen with modernity that changed everything. It reversed the order of time itself. It's not true we've always been doing the same. You know, that's the Reddit lie about history. You know what else is a lie? And this is also what I'm gonna get to later, or I wanted to get to a little later, is this idea of progress. We've always had technological progress. No, we didn't. Life, more or less, remained the same for thousands of years. The changes in irrigation and roads and stuff like that has changed, especially aesthetically, right? The way in which things looked. I mean, the use of bronze and iron and steel, yeah, those are very clear kind of gradual changes in history. But change was not immediate. Change did not last generations. The change happened, and then generations came to adjust to that. But modern life is the first time where every single person at every moment of time is just confronted with this apocalypse, right? I'm confronted. You see me. I'm always yelling and getting angry, just being pushed beyond the threshold of what a normal human being can tolerate. That's just a kind of extreme version of what everyone's going through, or every human being has to go through. We are always being confronted. It's almost like there's an Uncle Sam in front of us, always pointing at us at all fucking times. We can never just live life in this kind of more natural way. We're always being confronted with the need to act. And when I say act, I mean make life-altering decisions. But people before the modern age didn't have to do that. The way they lived their life was passed on from generations before them, and the way people behaved and lived their life wasn't based on actions. I'm saying actions in the sense of like, in the philosophical sense of an act, right? Or like maybe a leap of faith, as Kierkegaard would put it, right? We have to act almost all the time. In ancient times or medieval times, you would have a war, or you would have just this fundamental, this catastrophe, right? And this would be the act that defines history. And then generations would just live afterwards, not having to act at all. I'm not saying they were doing nothing, okay? They weren't doing nothing. They were still doing stuff. They just didn't have to act. They didn't have to make these decisions. They lived in a more or less kind of natural, organic way, if you want to put it like that. They were being. Staying alive was the action. I feel so sorry for you, man. I just feel so fucking sorry for you. Oh, God, man. Fuck. Who's the dialectic? You're coping. You're just coping. You're giving a Reddit view of history, which is just not true. It's a cope. I want you guys to understand the sorry truth. Keep coping all you want with your Reddit narratives. Whig history was the first Reddit narrative. This idea that there's just this linear progress of time that's always happened. Let me tell you the truth. With modernity, and specifically the Industrial Revolution, you can talk about the French Revolution as the political form of this, but the Industrial Revolution, this is the humiliation, this is the wound, this is the scar, and this is the problem of the modern age. For the first time, something happened which could not be justified by any precedent. And people who have lived more or less the same way for thousands of years were for the first time confronted with the fact that somehow, not only were they wrong, it almost seems like the way people had been living for thousands of years is completely fucking meaningless. Now you can cope with that by saying nothing even changed, but something did change. Something did fucking change. The problem of modernity, which we have not recovered from, and we have not made sense of, and we haven't found a way to be at peace with, is simply this. there are these cuts in the continuity of time. These cuts, which we are forced and always and every time confronted with the necessity, the immediate necessity of living our life according to. Just this cut in the continuity of living natural time. How do we make meaning out of that? How do we make sense of that? How do we survive that even? You know? We haven't made sense of it, but when I tell you about Anglo-Saxon metaphysics, let me tell you how the modern world has made sense of it. We have erased, and you can see this in my chat, we have erased any memory of the fact that this rupture even happened. We pretend that time has somehow began with a cause, or the Big Bang or whatever, right? We measure time in this absolute way. Do you guys want to know why I started to get insomnia? Because I've been thinking about this and writing about it for years, but I started to get insomnia because of this kind of anxiety of just trying to resist absolute time, right? We have this sense of absolute time. Abstract and absolute time. Every single second that passes is a second counted. Every single millisecond that passes is a millisecond that's counted. Counted by a cause. Things don't just flow like a river. Every single thing is differentiated and counted according to a singular cause. When we work, what is the proletarian doing when they work? What is work? Work is Sisyphus carrying the boulder up the hill in modernity. In the past, labor, again, it was organic and natural. It was based on being. Labor was a form of being. You simply did it as an extension of your life. But only in the modern age do we clock in and we clock out. We clock in, we expend a definite amount of our energy, and then we clock out. So it's like there's this interruption, right, in our life. Work is an interruption of our peace. What do most of you guys do when you go home after work? Don't you just kind of sit on the couch and just chill and just fucking, you know, don't you just kind of like stare at a wall and think? Like, just, don't we get such a sense of peace just from being able to kind of like not have the pressure of having to do anything? I'm not saying doing nothing is giving us peace and comfort in life, but not having the pressure to have to do anything, this external pressure that we experience is just this kind of alien force to do something. When that pressure's off, it's almost like we can live, right? We can actually live and breathe. Well, that's what it seems like pre-modern life was like. In pre-modern life, people worked, but they never had this immediacy of absolute pressure on them to work. They never had it at gunpoint where it was the point where it's like, if you don't work now, the world is gonna end. It's like, okay, we have to go through the motions and work, right? But we integrate that with our life in this harmonious kind of way, right? We don't clock in and clock out. It's part of our way of life. It's part of our very way of life, right? And it's never precise or absolute. You know, there's some jobs people are working where if they make one small mistake, there's gonna be a nuclear meltdown, like at a nuclear plant, right? You didn't have that before. You didn't have the pressure of an apocalypse always on you at all fucking times. So now that we have this understanding, I'm sure you guys understand and you get it now. Now that we have this understanding, why is it that when you go to Reddit, you go to the premier representatives of Anglo-Saxon modernity, and you ask them, please represent the good life, represent a utopia, represent the ideal, represent a good human life, they will precisely depict something that uncannily resembles this pre-modern world. Tolkien. In Tolkien's world, the hobbits and the humans and the elves, they're all living in this kind of freedom, right? The elves, they're like living, you know, how they're, you know, the elves they're getting high off of it, right? All the way at the top, everything's so harmonious and peaceful. The hobbits in the Shire running around barefoot in the woods. And then finally, this is precisely how Ukraine is being depicted. Ukraine with its endless gold pastures and sunny blue sky. Now, and then if you look at Ask Leftist, what's an ideal world? It's this ecological world of solar punk, and it's everything's wholesome, Chungus, whatever, hobbits and elves and whatever. Something is wrong. Something's wrong. Something's very wrong. Now, meanwhile, how is Russia depicted? Especially in Ukraine. How is Russia depicted in Ukraine? Russia's act of invading Ukraine, Russia's act of going into Ukraine, is the act, according to how it's being depicted, of modernity that turned the world on its head. It's this cut, this interruption in this harmonious, peaceful life that confronts us with the anxiety of modernity, the anxiety of the absolute. Now that is fucking paradoxical, isn't it? That's extremely paradoxical. That's extremely paradoxical. That's very, very strange. How do we make sense of that? Finally, let's sexualize this. It's very clear that this peacefulness, this naturalness of pre-modern life, traditional life, is feminine. It's sociological. It's going with the flow. It's the kind of living according to the mother goddess or whatever, right? And then acts, singular acts, which change everything. Like Russia's. Or the Industrial Revolution. That's the logos, right? Which is phallic and masculine. So, we also associate this Sisyphus of pushing the boulder up the hill. It's what a man does. A man pushes against the river of time, of natural time. All the feminist, decolonial, whatever people in the universities, they all say this, by the way. This is what they say. A man in vain tries to go against the grain. In today's West, we have, not coincidentally, a crisis of masculinity. People don't know how to act. It's not that people don't know how to live. People do know how to live, clearly. They live with Funko Pops and Nintendo Switches and Marvel, and they live based on consumption. But people don't know how to act. They don't know how to act. They don't know how to make a decision that will define their life, define their identity, and define their being. They're incapable of any kind of act, any kind of action. And we're almost kind of, we're very convinced that this act that defines a man is vain. Anyone who does it is just, you know, you're being like Haz, you're being an insecure, whatever. You're trying to resist this kind of tide of feminization, right? And it's like, this is the natural flow of things, and you're trying to resist progress, and you're trying to resist history. Sorry, not just history, but you're trying to resist progress. You're trying to resist everything, right? What's the problem with this? The problem... Please bear with me, guys. The problem is Will Smith. The problem is Will Smith. You don't believe me? How much you want to bet that this is going to make sense? We can say no more arbitrary acts that defy the cosmos and defy nature and defy the natural going of things. No more of this arbitrary acts. No more. So go with the flow. Let things be. What happens? You end up running into a contradiction. You end up running into a contradiction is what happens. When you go with the flow and just go with whatever is the natural flow of history that they're trying to depict, and just completely let go, be a pothead, you know, smoke your pot, just go with the flow, man, live your life according to that. Instead of being like Haz, who's this angry, insecure, guy who's so insecure, and then they're always trying to go against the flow. You end up being confronted with a contradiction. Now, what is that contradiction? It's the fact that this natural flow isn't natural. And you get to some point where you're confronted with that fact in the form of difference. The very fact that there are others living a different way of life, coming from a different civilization, a different history, different than yours, begins to confront you as an interruption in your flow, even though it's not. Difference, right, isn't based on an act. Difference itself is part of being. So if there's a Mother Nature, if there's a Mother Earth, she's a bitch. She's a real bitch. Because she has more than one child, not just you. She doesn't only have one child, she has other children too. With different fathers. With different fathers. Every act that the modern, or I should say postmodern subject is confronted with is itself an act that has to destroy the whole fucking world. It has to be an apocalypse. The type of act people make now is traveling overseas to join ISIS, or now they're traveling to Ukraine. Or it's committing horrific acts like mass shootings or things like this, of this nature, right? Or killings, whatever. Or it's like what Will Smith did, right? Isn't that what he did? He engaged in an act for the first time in his fucking life. But this act was like beyond the threshold. Which, you think Will Smith can ever come to terms or be harmonious with that act? No. He did something that crossed the boundary of what's acceptable publicly, right? And he crossed the boundary basically of anything that he's ever even going to be able to cope with. He cried afterwards. He had to cry. So he engaged in this act and then he recovered for it by crying. Is that what a man does, though? That's not what a man does. A man who commits an act isn't actually committing an act in defiance of nature and in defiance of destiny and in defiance of history and in defiance of the river of time. What they are doing is responding to contradictions within the river of time itself. So a man's act is itself part of the river of time. It's part of nature. It's part of whatever. And how is it? Tradition is indexed. Tradition is Freudian. Tradition is based in the name of the father of Freud. Not because some guy randomly did this arbitrary thing that grounded tradition. Because tradition isn't just some pagan kind of like everything is one continuum. No, traditions are ruptures in time that somehow become part of time. That's the most important part, though. It's these differences in being that somehow become part of the harmony of being. You don't just have this pure harmony of being. And this is why it's so weird how there's this kind of convergence between the postmodern left on one hand and then what it appears to be a kind of pre-modern fantasy world, right? Think about it in terms of land back. So you have the left, right, who are fantasizing about decolonization, eliminate all gender differences. We're all going to become forest fairies and become rhizomatic, liquefied. All differences will be eliminated and it'll all just be one continuous jellyfish reality, you know? And then all differences are impositions by the Oedipal, whatever, phallus, right? Total orgy. But this kind of is similar to Tolkien's world of hobbits running around in barefoot and everything is, you know, peaceful and tranquil. And then now you have the symbol of Ukraine with the golden fields and blue sky, and it's just this fantastical projection of, like, let me show you Ukraine flag. Let me explain to you what's going on. So, I'll explain this in terms of the LGBT flag. Don't worry, I'm not gonna go, I'm not gonna go problematic. I'm just gonna say something that should be uncontroversial, whatever. So there are let's just say there's certain elements or aspects of the Western LGBT movement, right? Which culminates in the Ukraine flag. Not LGBT just in the sense of different sexual practices or whatever. I'm talking about like the more extreme faction which wants to eliminate all gender and sexual differences, right? And then we all become jellyfish. Now, I'm not saying, I'm not denigrating or insulting or how should I say, engaging in abuse or hate against anyone. I'm just providing a description. This is purely descriptive, right? Purely descriptive. I'm just giving a pure description, alright? I know, of course, it's completely prohibited to speak negatively about the LGBT movement. It's not allowed. That's very clear. It's not what I'm doing, right? I'm just speaking descriptively. Okay? The music's distracting, that's okay. So, Ukraine flag. Here you have the golden, this is how it's being represented, I'm saying, right? I mean, directly, they're literally drawing it this way. This is the golden pastures and the blue sky, right? This is Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. So here, on this golden pasture, is the world of all gender fluid, harmony, non-binary, all the identities together, mixing together, all differences have collapsed. Liberalism and freedom, and it's all part of this ecological, indigenous as well, land back, the healing of the scars of the past, the indigenous people are here, everyone is here, right? And then the blue sky above, radiating in harmony, and it's very strange. Furries as well, furries are here, and everyone is here together holding hands in harmony. In the golden fields. And that's Ukraine versus Mordor, which is Russia to the east, which is interrupting this harmony. But the paradox I'm trying to drive home is that all of these things I mentioned are hyper-modern phenomena, which are completely interruptions in traditional. I mean, you talk about traditional, organic, natural life, it is based on traditional gender roles, and based on, you know, patriarchal kind of society of there's a patriarch and there's, you know, tradition and all this kind of stuff. Whereas this is kind of hyper modern, need furries and all that kind of stuff. So how is it that Russia, which is a more conservative kind of traditional society, is the Mordor, right? That's all I'm trying to say. It's very strange, isn't it? It's very, very strange. Well, I'll explain it to you. Fuck. Hold on. Let me get rid of this. I'll explain it to you. The West, specifically the forces of, let's say, the Anglo-Saxon elites, beginning with the Industrial Revolution, the bourgeoisie, and then later the Nazis, who were the quintessential forces of the worst excesses of industrial modernity, have always found refuge in this kind of Tolkien-like fantasy, actually, of a harmonious pre-modern world. The sorry truth of the matter, and this is where the significance of dialectical materialism enters the picture, and Marxist materialism. Specifically dialectic, right? Specifically dialectics enters the picture. Is that the world is quite literally upside down. The so-called forces of tradition have always been this way. Helena Blavatsky, she was an occultist, and she represented all of the ancient wisdoms of the pre-modern world, right? The ancient, we've lost it all with our modern world. And then she was associated with Julius Evola and all those kind of people. Their modern equivalent would be LGBT and furries and all that kind of stuff all together. Theosophy, yeah. But here's the strange thing about Theosophy. Theosophy was extremely modern. There was nothing traditional about Theosophy at all. it reflected the customs and practices of the modern ruling class. There was nothing ancient or traditional about it whatsoever. So why does the bourgeoisie, which itself is the representative of this kind of destructive and singular act of modernity, right? Why does it always take refuge in the past before everything went wrong? Why is Tolkien so popular? Why do we like the Shire and elves and hobbits, and we hate the kind of industrial orcs from Mordor, when our society is almost exclusively defined by the complete elimination of these old traditions and whatever? And it's like we're pure Mordor, right? That's our society. So why this contradiction? This is where the significance and importance of dialectics enters the picture. The truth is, what am I going to say, guys? What's the truth here? The truth can be explained in very simple terms. It's called class struggle. Why was Marx called Prometheus? Marx was called Prometheus because he revealed something. He revealed that there was never actually a conflict between the forces of pure tradition on the one hand and pure modernity on the other hand. Because we can see the so-called forces of modernity project precisely this false, simulated fantasy of tradition. They never actually acknowledge the cut, the split, and the contradiction and the interruption in the continuity of time that modernity has provoked. But what about the other side of the coin? You see, it wasn't between the pre-modern world and the modern world. It was about a struggle that had been waging for thousands and thousands of years, unnoticed, that this simply has thrown to the fore. The only thing that changed is now it has been put into the spotlight. But the struggle had always been going on. And what is this struggle in question? The struggle has been between the struggle which culminates into the class struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. It's the struggle between the people and the oligarchic elites. It's the struggle between the workers and the idlers. It's the struggle between the forces of religious revolutions versus the entrenched priests and the priest castes that preserved the so-called pagan wisdoms of the past. It was the struggle between people in the countryside against people in the cities. And it was the struggle between nomads and people who were sedentary and settled. It's the same exact contradiction. Technological modernity, which changed everything, wasn't only one-sided. The reason Marx was called Prometheus was because he gave this back to the people. Marx revealed that the forces of enlightenment that gave rise to industrial modernity didn't simply come from the actions of a mad scientist or evil alchemist or some kind of occult, whatever. There was a struggle going on. It was that the contradiction that struggle produced, which took the form of the modern world as we know it. So to return back to what I was posing before, where thousands and thousands of years of tradition, history, was everyone wrong for living their lives the way they were? No, they weren't. Because what was dormant throughout that entire period and that entire time was the class struggle. It's always had been waged. It's not simply that life was harmonious and wholesome chungus. Yes, there was this basic aspect of humanity that people had before, where they could just live human lives according to some kind of, yes, natural human life. But that was embedded in a conflict, actually, with the idle and parasitical elites and ruling classes, who at every turn in history struggled against the authentic aspirations of the people. So, modern life has created two camps. Work has become completely alienated and estranged from the people. Work, before modernity, used to be, again, part of the natural flow of life. This has been completely alienated and ripped from the people's lives in the form of the commodity, the universal commodity. And now we're at the most decisive moment in the history of humanity, according to Marx. It's not between tradition and modernity. That's a false contradiction. The bourgeoisie have their tradition, but the working class also has its tradition. The Tolkien fantasy, how to break the Tolkien fantasy of the Ukraine and all this other kind of bullshit that we're being fed and we're being told, it's very simple. The Ukraine fantasy is a fantasy of Reddit idlers. All you have to do is reveal and expose the fact that it is grounded also in a patriarchal act. It's not Russia's invasion, which was this act that interrupted the flow of time. The flow of time has always been interrupted. And as a matter of fact, there is no flow of time with Ukraine. This Golden Fields is a fantasy of a time arrested. Think about this. Is there history in Tolkien's fantasy world? Is there history? No, nothing ever changes. Everything is always the same time. Everything. Nothing ever changes. There's one act of creation and then it's just everything's the same forever. There's different stories that happen, but there's no historical change. There's no Mongol invasion that changes there's no there's no Christianity, there's nothing like that. Nothing ever changes. It's one pagan world of pagan fantasy. And, by the way, where does medieval fantasy even come from? It comes from the 80s, believe it or not. Medieval fantasy has its origins 70s and 80s. Around 70s and 80s is when it started to get popular. And it was about precisely projecting this kind of past, precisely at the moment in which we have completely been severed entirely from it. Give me a moment. Isn't it strange how only when we have a computer simulated era of history do we strive to go back to Avatar, CGI, and so on? Keep that contradiction in mind. And ask yourself a very simple question. The way they've coped with this contradiction of modernity is this notion of progress. What is progress? It's a lie. It's a lie that was meant to explain why the fundamental change of modernity had happened. And the way they lied about it was saying, well, this change was always happening throughout history. We just got a little closer to it now. No, you didn't. There was one singular change, which you called progress. Progress to what? Progress to what? Progress implies an ends. It always implies an ends. So what is the ends of progress? To what? What have we gotten closer to? It's a lie. It's meant to obscure the fundamental contradiction that actually defines modern history. Yeah, they project their copium backward to the origin. Well, I'll tell you what progress is. It's paradoxical. You know, I have talked about archaeo-modernity, which is this notion that the past is revealed through technological modernity. But there's also an opposite version. Let's call it modern archaeo. What do we call this? What do you call archaicness? I don't even know what you call this. Archaism, okay. There's also modern archaism, which is what this is. Modern archaism is when we assume that all of this hyper-modern stuff of all the gender liquid furries and all this kind of things that, non-binary and all this kind of stuff, it all culminates in this kind of very archaic fantasy of a medieval fields of golden Reddit and all. Like, we go from Reddit to this, right? Isn't it kind of weird? We go from Reddit to this. But it's the opposite of the archaeo-modernity of the Soviet Union and China. In the Soviet Union and China, they went from semi-feudal traditional societies to a modern communist society. It's a complete reversal. So what's changing now in history? Why have the tides of history changed? Well, for the first time, there is a kind of time war. Anglo-Saxon modernity brought with it a very specific understanding of time, which was linear, progressive time based on one absolute cause. And the time was measured in certainty. It was certain time, certain of the future, based on cause and effect. Ultimately based on the complete nothingness, self-relating nothingness of abstract modernity. You had this arrest of organic traditional time, and then modern time freezes everything. The Big Ben clock tower in London is very deceptive. When you see a clock, you think of motion. Clocks, what do clocks measure? They measure the motion of nothing. They measure literally the notion of nothing. Modern time is the passage of time of nothing. The past measured time directly in a very astrological way, whatever. What does a clock measure? Nothing. It literally measures nothing. It measures nothingness. Okay? And this nothingness is the abstraction that overturned the whole of the past. People lived for generations and generations and generations. Suddenly, everything became wrong and meaningless. Suddenly, everything became supposedly wrong and meaningless. How can meaning be restored to humanity? That is why I'm a Marxist. That's why I'm a Marxist-Leninist. Because a different order of time and a different being has emerged in China. Time itself passes differently in China. Time is not arrested in China. somehow it's become freed. The river of time, the flow of history, the flow of human living being has been freed and unleashed in China. Because for China, there isn't this linear notion of progress. Technological modernity has an end. You see this fucking water bottle? In China, this water bottle has an end. The ends are what? It's part of the China's 5-year plans. It's part of development of the forces of production and the rejuvenation of the Chinese civilization. Suddenly, the world is re-enchanted with a sense of meaning again. And that meaning is based on the development, the cultivation of the humanity of the Chinese people. Or as the party puts it, the overwhelming majority of the Chinese people. China has conquered the contradiction of modernity because it has discovered the meaning of modernity. It's not that old generations, everything was meaningless. It's not that everything was meaningless and wrong. For China, that's the century of humiliation, by the way. The reason the century of humiliation is so traumatic was because China got that rude awakening in that form of the century of humiliation itself. When the British came with their guns and when the Western powers humiliated China, that completely shocked them in every kind of fucking way. All of their expectations about the past and reality was completely overturned. And communism is China's way of making sense of that and finding meaning in that. The Ottomans, the same thing. But the difference is that we, post-Ottoman people, and the most of the Middle East is post-Ottoman. We haven't solved the problem either. We're still coping. We haven't actually found meaning in what happened. But how did China do this? China has done this by integrating the history of the Communist Party of China into the patriarchal history of the Chinese civilization. It's like the Communist Party is the latest dynasty. Everything that has happened is just a chapter in the wider and longer, thousands of years old history of China. And the rupture of modernity that was posed by the century of humiliation has always been a mere microcosm, a mere detail of the example of the general rupture posed by the class struggle throughout the entirety of China's history, which China has now resolved. We ask the question, why in the West? Why did it overturn all of modern life? And this is where I'm getting at with our upcoming video about Mongol modernity. Because here's the secret and here's the truth. The class struggle throughout history that disallows us from making a one-sided distinction between tradition and modernity also manifests itself in a distinction of the very recording of history itself. Is the actual change and foundation that gave rise to modern science, that gave rise to the cause and effect of astronomy and all that stuff with alchemy and culminating in science and the Industrial Revolution, French Revolution. The material foundation for this lied in the Mongol conquests. And do you know what that means, ladies and gentlemen? Do you know what it means for the real origins of modernity and the Enlightenment to have been in the Mongol conquests? It means the flow of history can be returned to humanity. history is once again meaningful and patriarchal. It's not that you have an organic history and then it's interrupted by this one act of modernity. The change had already happened, and it was part of and it was the continuation of Eurasia's natural history, which was Mongol modernity. Europe merely put it into words and reflected it. But the real change happened with the Mongols. Modernity has its origins in the Mongols. That means modernity does not have its origins in the self-relating nothingness of Anglo-Saxon metaphysics. Anglo-Saxon metaphysics of cause and effect with Hume and Hobbes and those people, Bacon, specifically Bacon, that's a bluff. Anglo-Saxon metaphysics was not responsible for the modern world. That was just a cope. That was a cope for a modernity whose material foundations were already built by the Mongols. Now let's go back to the so-called orcs of Russia, because interestingly, in Tolkien's fantasy universe, believe it or not, I don't know if you're aware of this, Mordor are the Mongols. The orcs for Tolkien are the Mongols. The orcs' language was modeled off of Mongol. The script of the orcs was modeled off of Mongol. The two races of Tolkien's universe are Europeans and Mongols. The Europeans are the elves, the Nordic, Germanics, whatever. The hobbits, for Tolkien, these are the people of the British Isles. And then men, which for Tolkien is probably like France or something, right? Dwarves, well, I don't even know if I can tell you what Tolkien meant by dwarves, but let's just say it's pretty problematic, right? But Tolkien meant yeah, well, you can look it up yourself. But needless to say, it's proof that European racism is not necessarily European Nazism, proto-Nazism, it's not necessarily anti-Semitic. It's not. Because for Tolkien, his problem is with Mongols and Asians. It's not with, yeah. That's according to Tolkien himself, or interpreters of Tolkien. From what I've read, Tolkien's book is a cope, not for the change of industrial modernity, but how do we explain the Mongol conquest? Were the Mongol conquests based on Genghis Khan waking up on the wrong side of the bed one day and just arbitrarily deciding, like Hitler, he's going to invade and conquer everyone? No. The Mongol conquests were based actually on a long-spanning dialectic of the history between nomads and sedentary peoples. And conquest in ancient times and in medieval times, there was no such thing as sovereignty. There was no such thing as this kind of, sovereign states. Everything was based on the sword, right? So if you could conquer a land and you can conquer, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. That's how it worked back then, right? So it's not like Genghis Khan was some criminal or thug who was going around stealing people's land. It's very important to understand that. And by the way, conquest was not modern back then. When Genghis Khan conquered people, he didn't say, I'm a god, so I have the right to conquer you. He said, I'm going to ride my horse and attack, and, we're going to do what we've always done as nomads and clash with another tribe. And sometimes the tribe takes the form of an entire other empire. And then if we win, that proves that the mandate of heaven or destiny or God's will favors us. We don't know if we're going to fucking win or not, but the fact that we have clearly means there's something destined about this, right? This is a lost history, by the way. They don't teach you history this way. They teach you history in terms of someone engaging in an act of conquest for completely arbitrary reasons, right? Then we can finally see the two distinctions that are forming in defining the Russia-Ukraine conflict. In the way it's being narrated and the way we're being taught about it. There's basically two versions of the story, right? One version of the story has us believe that Russia randomly attacked Ukraine in a complete violation of Ukraine's right to self-determination in this kind of arbitrary act of modernity. And then on the other hand, there's our version of events, which actually resembles our version of the events of the history of the Mongols, which is that there was already a continuity of conflict and undecidedness between Russia and Ukraine. I mean, just think about how anyone on our side describes what happened. There was a coup in 2014. There was already a war going on for 8 years in the Donbass, and this is just an extension of it, right? It's like there's two versions of this. On the one version, Russia randomly attacked Ukraine. What a bunch of assholes. And the other version, it's there already was problems, and that this was not just some random act. This was a chapter in a bigger story. That's our version of events. Is that this was a chapter in a bigger story, right? The way in which Russia is being depicted is a projection of the West's own evil. It's the West which engaged in arbitrary acts, but these acts are futile. It's the West which tries to overturn and upend. I mean, am I allowed to say that trying to eliminate gender is going to fail and it's just a vanity? It's not going to actually work. It's a form of psychological terrorism is what the West is imposing. They terrorize us with this anxiety of this arbitrary act that completely overturns all of time. The renaissance of every great people. I come from a Middle Eastern background. When I see my fellow Middle Eastern people, you want to know sometimes what I see on people's faces? This is like almost everyone from the former Ottoman territories, right? Or even Muslim territories, right? You know what I see? I see exhaustion. I see an exhaustion on everyone's fucking face. Like, maybe this is a stretch, right? But especially the elderly. When you look at an elderly, you just see this kind of confusion of the modern world. Like, we don't even know how to make sense of this shit, We don't even know what our place in this world is. How do we reconcile our civilization, our history, and our past with this just a random and abrupt change which suddenly everything that we ever knew was wrong? No, clearly we don't. We cling to our traditions, we cling to our culture, we cling to our past, but we're still confused. We're confused by technological modernity. We're confused by scientific modernity. It's like we're an old man with Alzheimer's lost in Walmart. We're living in the past, and we're lost in the middle of a grocery store. And we just don't know where we are. We don't know what the fuck is going on, right? But when you learn from the example of the Russian peoples, when you learn from the example of the Chinese people, you'll see that this amnesia and this confusion is a detail in the history of a class struggle. And that when the peoples of the former Ottoman or former Safavid, well, they already did, but when the peoples of the former Ottoman Empire awaken finally to modern history, they will see that they have just as much a claim to this modern world as anyone else. The modern world wasn't this fundamental interruption of the past, because the interruption itself was the culmination of a class struggle. That this awakening is part of our patriarchal history. When I say patriarchal, I mean it's part of the name of the Father. It's not like we finished history and then the Europeans came and completely changed our lives and changed the world. We still had a history. We still had a flow of time that was going on. And this is just part of that. By the time the Europeans came, history still wasn't finished. That's what the Russians and the Chinese learned. They never had a finished history. That even during the Qing dynasty, right, before the Europeans, there was a class struggle going on. There was something going on that was unresolved, completely unresolved. Now that's true for Eurasia, but then you say, Haz, what about these islands in the Pacific that were completely uncontacted and just randomly, like during World War II, where they just saw airplanes for the first time and shit their pants, quite literally, right? I mean, that's actually a real story. Like, there's these tribes on these islands in the Pacific. An airplane landed on the island. They saw it for the first time, and everyone was literally just vomiting, and it was just the most traumatic fucking thing you can imagine. The cargo cult story, yeah. The reason I remain a Marxist is because I don't think there's any other theory of the world that can make sense of that. That can give, and not just make sense, but give meaning to that fact. That humiliation. It is fucking humiliating. It's absolutely humiliating. It's humiliating that we, for the first time, awaken. Let me tell you what humiliation is. Imagine, it's like the emperor wears no clothes. It's like you've been walking outside this whole time, your life, right? And for the first time, someone comes up to you and tells you, hey, you're naked. And you never knew that. Nobody ever came and told you were naked. But you were living your whole life doing that. Your ancestors were living their whole time doing that. Or your parents, your grandparents. Someone for the first time tells you, hey, you don't have any clothes on. You're naked. There's an extreme sense of shame and humiliation that comes from being checked like that. So how do you make sense of that? Yeah, we took the role of the serpent in the garden. You eat the apple of knowledge and you suddenly become ashamed that you're fucking naked, right? How about the fact of modern medicine? Of how many people used to just die from disease and die from all these problems, and suddenly, it turns out you didn't actually have to die. It was all meaningless. We could have just saved you with this pill or something, right? It's the same fucking thing. Does that mean everything before was meaningless? No, it's not that it played a progressive role, because progress doesn't fucking exist. Well, that's why Marx talked about the riddle of class struggle being the riddle of history solved. Sorry, communism is the riddle of history solved in class. That was the whole significance of class struggle for Marx. For Marx, at no point did we solve the problem. All history is defined by a problem. You go to that Pacific island, wherever, right? Undiscovered before by anyone on the outside. Guess what? They had problems that weren't resolved. They had an issue that they never actually resolved. And suddenly, when the airplane lands and everyone starts shitting their pants, it's shocking at first. But you begin to learn and be able to understand your own history with so much more clarity. Like, what was the root cause of all of our strife and all of our problems? Well, now we can finally make that intelligible. If I continue with this topic, it's going to be like a 3-hour-long lecture again, right? But I want to transition to a final section, which is actually addressed to the now banned streamer Destiny. Why am I still focusing any time on this? I mean, technically, he's an irrelevant streamer. Doesn't matter, he's gone. No more significance. Because it's like when Stalin wrote in his pamphlet, yes, the anarchists are irrelevant, but that doesn't change the significance of their ideas. Also, this is what I've been hearing. According to YouTube statistics, for the first time, Destiny is starting to surpass Hassan and Vosh in terms of monthly views. So it may not be the end, right? It may be a new beginning for this ideology. But I will pose this so-called omni-liberal with a simple question. And I'm very curious to see how he could respond. And it's related to what we were talking about. He says he is ultimately still a left liberal or a liberal, right? He's committed to the same values he's always been committed to. The same ones from half a decade ago, right? He says it's just that the left has changed. The left has gotten more extreme. That's what Destiny says. He says, back in the day, it wasn't, I remember in 2010, it wasn't this extreme. And he's specifically talking about that in terms of the LGBT kind of stuff, right? I can't believe how stupid that what he said is. I thought maybe at least this guy's a little bit smart, but no, apparently not. So I would love to hear the response to this. Isn't that the same for every form of so-called right-wing conservatism? Let's say you take a progressive liberal from the year 1940 and you transplant them into 2022. Aren't they going to have values and positions that would be considered like super far right in 2022? Of course they would. There is clearly some kind of change that didn't begin Destiny with the last 5 years. It's not like the left was normal when you started to become a liberal. It's not like liberals were normal when you became a liberal and then everything went downhill in the past 5 years. Conveniently, that's just all of the time that has passed since you've become a left liberal, right? The question is, what justifies your left liberal values when they can be historicized as reflecting being a liberal in 2010 or 2011 or whatever year you adopted them in? Let's say, just for the sake of argument, 2013. Let's say you adopted all of your sense of normal or whatever in 2012, 2013. What justifies those in contradistinction to being a liberal in the year 2000 or 1990 or 1980 or 1970. And what Destiny will say is something like, it's because, at that time, this is what the majority of people considered normal. Well, how did they come to consider that normal? Well, it's through the same mechanism of so-called progress, which you are now decrying and trying to resist. You are trying to resist the progress, right? Surrounding some stuff which I can't even talk about, right? But you're trying to resist that. I'm asking you why? It's completely arbitrary. You know what I mean? It's like, you say the left has gotten too extreme, but that's relative. The left, or liberals, have always been changing since maybe forever, right? Since, I can't even put a date on it. Maybe the 20s, maybe the 1800s even, who knows, right? But they've always been changing. Why have you suddenly stopped and said, no, it's gone too far now? Why wasn't it too far when you were a liberal? Weren't you an extreme liberal back then? Well, no. Based on what reasoning? Well, because this is what was normal at the time. But it was only normal because of the extremely toxic and fanatical and extremist efforts of left liberals to push things on our society, which the majority of our society considered extremely alien and extremely frightening and extremely unreasonable and weird and foreign, right? And then it became normalized later, right? It's like, you know how they say this about rap music? I mean, I have an answer for this because I understand the ends of progress. So I understand the ends of progressive liberalism. I understand what its ends are. So I can actually establish a relationship to it that's based in clarity. But Destiny doesn't actually, he doesn't care about philosophy. He's not going to actually be like, okay, what are the actual ends of liberal progress? He doesn't ever ask that question. He just defers to what he considers normal. It's by the majority of the population already. But he doesn't actually address how it is that progress happens. He just addresses how it's already happened and how we need to defend what's already happened. Well, what gives you the right to defend what's already happened when that was based in the same form of unreasonable, irrational extremism in terms of how it actually came to be as the one you're now trying to resist? Don't you guys think that makes him really dumb? Don't you think that's like why has no one ever raised this point? It's totally arbitrary. You say, oh, I miss how it was in 2010. Well, someone in 2010 is probably going to miss how it was in the year 2000. You're not addressing the root cause of all these things. That's why I predict the ideological collapse of omniliberalism. You have not actually gotten to the root cause of the problem. You're arbitrarily saying the left got too extreme. You don't go to the root of the problem, though. You don't know why this stuff is that. You can't even explain why this shit has fucking happened. Right? He must either become a right-winger, which I can't see happening. How can Destiny become a right-winger living the lifestyle that he lives? The right would never accept him. He's got to completely repent for everything he's ever been in his whole life to do that, right? It's totally unsustainable. This has been going on for a few years since he broke with Hassan, but I predict this is ultimately going to be totally unsustainable. He's going to become a neocon. That's what's going to happen. All of these people on Destiny's side, they're going to become the new generation of neocons. That's what it is. Neoconservatives. You know, neoconservatism doesn't just mean, oh, we're the new version of conservatives. It's based in Leo Strauss's idea of like the fundamental foundations of the liberal West and why they must be defended. So he tried to give like an explanation for progress, the ends of progress. It's based on these fundamental foundations of West, which is a synthesis of Athens and Jerusalem, right? Judeo-Christian civilization. That's what the whole basis of neoconservatism, right? Destiny is going to need to arrive at something similar to the ideas of Leo Strauss if he's going to sustain his position. Because simply saying, "Oh, I'm a progressive liberal," well, that's all. That shit is just jellyfish, abstract, complete. It's not based in anything real, right? It's just, and it's also arbitrary, right? It doesn't actually explain anything. It doesn't get to the root cause of why anything is the way it is. And that, by the way, that's always been my substantive critique of Destiny's politics. If you want to hear it summed up in like 30 seconds, it's this. Destiny can't actually explain why the world is the way it is. He can't explain why people have the ideologies, beliefs, and ways of life that they do. He just takes those for granted and defers to them to form his entire political position and worldview. He doesn't actually tap into what drives changes in history. He just takes the changes for granted and begins from there. Which is weird because that's like a way of trying to objectify humanity, despite the fact that he himself is human, part of the same world. He treats humanity like a zoo where it's all these animals he treats in a completely objective way where, oh, well, this is the animal's behavior and, well, I can't explain why it is. I'm just going to take it for granted, right? I can't tap into the same common cause of what makes us human. I'm just going to assume, I'm going to be an empiricist and assume we are the way we are, like for some objective reason, not a reason that has anything to do with my subjectivity. What do you think we will see the end of this Tolkien serpentine world order we find ourselves in? We're seeing the end of it now. We're seeing the end of it right now.